This is the politics of Star Wars.
Star Wars is a media property that's so entrenched in our public consciousness that it can be easier said than done to actually separate the films from our perceptions of them. A recent strain of fandom is set to ignore the socio-political messages of the first two trilogies and instead believe that Star Wars under Disney introduced quote-unquote SJW messages and values into the saga. In a word, no. The original trilogy is the story of a diverse band of rebels dismantling an evil fascistic empire. The prequel trilogy is a detailed breakdown of a peaceful and democratic republic into that evil fascistic empire. Even the most surface-level examination of the film shows that their claim is baseless and ignorant at best. Lucas wasn't exactly hiding these elements in the background like some common cantina mantis. If anything, the Star Wars films under Disney are much less interested in embracing the inherent political and social messages of Star Wars than any of the films released under Lucas.
I'm the spy.
Don't worry, we'll tackle that in episode 3 when we examine the sequel trilogy. Go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss it. It's been more than 40 years since Lucas released Star Wars in 1977. Since then, the original trilogy has been re-released, re-edited, touched up, and expanded on with perhaps more additional material than any pop culture franchise in history. The Star Wars universe is ever expanding. If there's something you're curious about, the Star Wars universe rewards that curiosity with an answer. When writing the first draft of this script, there were 161,938 articles on Wikipedia, the Star Wars wiki. By the time I got to the second draft, there were 162,359 pages on Wikipedia. By the time I filmed this video, there was 162,482 articles. The expansion of the Star Wars universe is constant, and as a result, the intricacies of it are ever developing. The Star Wars universe is almost as fleshed out as the real world because the franchise has evolved into an unrivaled collaborative fiction project. Star Wars now contains the ideas, visions, and imaginations of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of creators across live-action film, television, novels, comic books, manga, video games, animation, reference material, and even theme parks. The Star Wars original trilogy, the retroactively titled Episode 4, A New Hope, 1977, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, 1980, and Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, 1983, exist inside of a universe that's now so large and developed that it's no mean feat to pin down what Lucas's films and Lucas himself have to say about our real world. If our goal is to appreciate the politics of Star Wars fully, it's key to understand which ideas Lucas introduced himself in the original trilogy and why. Because those themes and motifs make up the foundation for the franchise and everything that would follow. Despite incorporating this veritable legion of voices and imaginations, the socio-political messages found at the heart of Lucas's original Star Wars films remain consistent throughout the franchise. The reason is that when Lucas sat down to craft the world of Star Wars, he expressly understood that he was building a modern myth with certain essential elements and concrete truths. As we'll see, his reasons for doing so were almost altruistic and perhaps surprisingly radical.
Basically, my main interest in school and ever since has been cultural anthropology and sociology and those related social fields. And so my take on art is more culturally oriented, and I look at art as sort of as a way of judging a culture and understanding not really what it looked like or anything, but what the people were thinking and what the people were feeling and what was going on at a particular time.
A lot has been said over the years about George Lucas's appreciation of mythology, and in particular his love of Joseph Campbell's 1949 mythology text, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. At this point, it's common knowledge that Lucas built Star Wars on the framework of Campbell's ideas. It's even a vital element of the official Disney party line about what Star Wars is and why the films resonate.
It's possible that if I hadn't run across that, I would still be writing Star Wars today.
Joseph Campbell's work did not exist in a vacuum and was an expansion on the work of German anthropologist Adolf Bastian.
Bastian, Adolf Bastian, B-A-S-T-I-A-N.
Bastian proposed that myths and religions worldwide and throughout history were all built on the same elementary ideas. In addition to Bastian, Campbell was deeply influenced by the work of Carl Jung. Jung expanded Bastian's concept of elementary ideas into his conception of archetypes, which we now call Jungian archetypes. Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, believed that archetypes were not merely the building blocks of stories, but also the building blocks of our internal consciousness and what he proposed as the collective unconscious.
There exists a second psychic system of a collective, universal, and impersonal nature, which is identical in all individuals. This collective unconscious does not develop individually, but is inherited. It consists of pre-existent forms, the archetypes, which can only become conscious secondarily and which give definite form to certain psychic contents. Carl Jung, The Concept of the Collective Unconscious, 1936.
Jung believed that those archetypes were universal and archaic symbols innate to human psychology, passed on to us from our most ancient ancestors. He proposed that our unconscious minds intrinsically recognize archetypes, and that's why archetypes and the myths built from them resonate so strongly. Campbell's work isn't quite as overtly metaphysical as Jung's, but he's no less romantic about why we build myths.
Mythologies are in fact the public dreams that move and shape societies. And conversely, one's own dreams are the little myths of the private gods, anti-gods, and guardian powers that are moving and shaping oneself. Revelations of the actual fears, desires, aims, and values by which one's life is subliminally ordered.
Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell on his life and work.
The main thrust of Campbell's work is that humanity's most lasting stories, whether mythological, religious, or merely pop fiction, contain these classic motifs, and he proposes the monomyth or hero's journey as the basis for them. Here's how Campbell describes the hero's journey.
A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man.
Joseph Campbell, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, 1949.
There are 17 steps on Campbell's model for the hero's journey, depicted here paired with the elements of the Star Wars original trilogy that connect most closely. In Campbell's authorized biography, A Fire in the Mind, George Lucas said,
"It was very eerie because in reading The Hero with 1,000 Faces, I began to realize that my first draft of Star Wars was following classic motifs. So I modified my next draft according to what I'd been learning about classical motifs and made it a little bit more consistent."
Neither Campbell's interpretation of myth or Jung's conception of archetypes are beyond criticism. For our purposes today, we need to simply note that each had a lasting impact on the young George Lucas. While I've unearthed no direct evidence that Lucas read Jung, Jung's work had such a remarkable impact on Campbell's that many of Jung's ideas directly filter through to Lucas's work anyway. Lucas believes, and I'm inclined to agree with him, that Star Wars succeeded because he understood something innate and powerful about Campbell and Jung's work. People, i.e. the potential audience for his films, react strongly to archetypes and monomythic elements. In 1973, when Lucas started to work on Star Wars, he was in the market for a vehicle to deliver heavy social commentary in a way that could also invoke emotional involvement in his work. His experimental first feature, THX 1138, received mixed reviews from critics, with many viewers, including Lucas's then wife and later Star Wars editor, Marcia Lucas, noting that it left them cold. The film was considered a commercial failure. Notably, THX 1138 was also a warning of a future dystopian police state featuring dialogue sourced from the speeches of Richard Nixon, who may come up a bit later.
Well, I wanted to tell a modern myth that was in the classic mode and motif of old mythology. And I came to this conclusion that the Western was the last of the American mythology. The Western was the last time we sort of dealt with our culture and what we expect from our society and what the rules are and what the lessons we've learned. That all was in Westerns. Once we got past the Western, which was in sort of the late 50s, early 60s, the culture, which was the Vietnam War, and the political situation, and the nature of the way we changed, that mythology was thrown out, and nobody decided to pass it on to the next generation.
Lucas saw the American tradition of Westerns as the last attempt at an American self-mythology. and noted that it had not yet found its space-age equivalent. Sensing an opportunity to fill the void of modern mythology in a country in the throes of ideological wars at home and abroad, he combined the two to significant effect.
And what they really were for was to inspire the next generation to carry on the same values that the last generation has had. And what do we expect of you? What have we learned that you should sort of take with you?
Lucas also clearly understood that emphasizing the mythological and archetypal elements of his story would give his socio-political ideas longer legs with the audience he thought would most benefit from those messages: children.
But then when I started to go into Star Wars, they said, "Why are you making a children's film?" I said, "Well, because I think I can have more of an influence on people. And I think I can have things to say that I can actually influence kids, adolescents, 12-year-olds. And, that are trying to make their way into the bigger world." And that's basically what mythology was to say, I'm saying, this is what we believe in, these are our rules, this is what we are as a society.
While Lucas thought myth would help him hand off his generation's values to the next, those values were pointedly not the same set that the Westerns tried to communicate. Those were American exceptionalist and benevolently imperial values that Lucas was in almost direct opposition to, which we'll expand on in a moment.
Why don't they stay on the reservation where they belong?
Lucas's deployment of archetypes and mythology extend beyond just the characters he created for his world and out into that entire world. Just as we can understand various Star Wars characters as the monomythic or Jungian archetypes they embody, we can also understand the Rebellion and the Jedi and the Empire as archetypal versions of real-world socio-political factions. Jung's conception of archetypes does not only apply to individual figures, like those of the wise old man, the trickster, the hero, and the shadow, but also what he names as archetypal events, like birth, death, initiation, the union of opposites, and so on. I'm positing that Lucas understood that he could apply the same sort of symbolic value to his world's factions just as easily to the archetypal events depicted. The Empire is every empire. The Rebellion is every rebellion. Like the named archetypes of Jung and the monomythic elements of Campbell, these are the Empire and Rebellion, through which our subconscious can innately understand every empire and every rebellion. However, these factions are also direct reflections of the real world. While the aesthetic origins may paint one picture of what Lucas was trying to teach the next generation, the real-world politics and history Lucas actually reflected paint a very different one.